One of the biggest game changers for me in my own private practice was when I started taking part in some mastermind groups. If you're just starting out in private practice, or maybe you've been in practice for a while and you've kind of hit a glass ceiling, one of the big things that you can do is really learn from others and get the support of others. There's so much that goes into building a successful practice, and sometimes knowing where to focus and knowing where to put your energy is confusing. But a mastermind group can give you clarity with that and help you figure out your next action steps to build a successful private practice. So in the fall of 2018, I'm starting some mastermind groups. So go over to practiceoftherapy.com/mastermind and just take a look at the information there. And then the next thing you would need to do is go ahead and fill out an application to join a mastermind group. And then what will happen next is that we'll just simply have a conversation about whether or not this would be a good fit for you. So head over to practiceoftherapy.com/mastermind and take a look. It might be the best thing you ever did. This is the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer. This is session number 41 of the Practice of Therapy podcast. Hello, folks. I'm your host, Gordon Brewer, and I'm so glad you've joined me for this podcast. If you've been listening to the podcast, you might notice that this sounds just a little bit different. And the main reason is that I'm recording this very much remotely. I'm spending this week at a camp that I volunteer with every summer called Grace Point Camp. And this week we've got a group of middle school kids here for summer camp, and I'm just having a great time. I'm actually doing the program for them, and we're doing stuff on how to deal with fear. And my daughter, who just graduated from college, is helping me with this program, and we're just having a blast just being with these kids and helping them learn about emotions and dealing with fear. And it's just been a blast. And I do this every year. And so so I'm taking some time out this afternoon to get another episode of the podcast out there. If you're listening for the first time, I'm glad you've joined me, glad you found me. And if you've been listening before, I'm glad you're back. And hopefully this you'll find the podcast helpful for you. This episode, I'm doing something a little different. It's the first time I've done this, is that I'm actually doing what we refer to as a reverse interview. Last week, I was on Joe Sanok's The Practice of the Practice podcast, and Joe has been just a great friend and in many ways a mentor and colleague, and we have I've just really enjoyed getting to know Joe Sanok. And he's really one of the people that kind of inspired me to really think about starting the practice of therapy and then really doing the podcast, which is, coming up on in the month of August. I will have been doing the podcast for a year, which is just hard to believe. But anyway, what I was saying is that Joe has been so gracious to let me be on his podcast 2 other times, and then in this particular episode of the podcast of his podcast, The Practice of the Practice, he interviewed me about using GSuite and why therapists might want to use GSuite in their practice. And you hear a lot about that from me, about using GSuite and why I feel like it's beneficial for therapists to use that particular tool, in particular getting the paid version of GSuite and then getting that BAA, that Business Associate Agreement, that helps you be HIPAA compliant and HIPAA secure with your data and with your email and all of that kind of good stuff. And for a lot of you, you've heard from me about the course that I put together, GSuite for Therapists, and you can check that out over at practiceoftherapy.com/GSuite Course. And I think Joe and I mentioned it in his podcast as well. You can get to the course as well through Joe's website, Practice of the Practice. One of the things I thought about too as I was getting ready to record this, there are so many private practice podcasts out there that are really good. And the thing that I love about this community of private practice consultants and private practice coaches is that we really tend to collaborate with each other a good bit. There's not a whole lot of competition, or at least there's not a feel of that. And I think, getting into business coaching or private practice coaching is really a great way to really up your game in terms of building a practice and making it much more successful. I know I've just benefited from it a whole lot. But anyway, in this episode, I'm being interviewed by Joe Sanok, and this was also heard on the Practice of the Practice podcast. So if you want to listen to it over there, you can. But without further ado, here is my interview, or Joe's interview of me from the Practice of the Practice podcast.
Well, today on the Practice of the Practice podcast, we have Gordon Brewer, who has Practice of Therapy. He has been a regular guest on the Practice of the Practice podcast. Gordon, welcome. How you doing today?
Well, good. Thanks, Joe. I'm glad to be here again.
Yeah. You brought me and Christina when you were here in Traverse City, your Practice of Therapy coffee mugs or smoothie mugs, and I've been using it, but today I should have brought it, but I didn't think ahead.
Well, that's fine.
Yeah. So how have you been doing since you were here in Traverse City?
Yeah, great. It's we've had a great, it's been a whirlwind. My daughter just graduated from college this past weekend. And so we're past, so we're on to that next phase of life and the next transition, and all of that. And then on top of that, just to make it all fun, I stepped in a hole moving her out of her dorm and sprained my ankle. It's not broken, but it looks like it is. But other than that, we're doing okay. So
well, I think that's why we get along so well, is we both really value our family time, and it's like being a good dad is really part of just who you are as a person.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Joe. Yeah, I think that's true. And I know there's so much that we've kind of learned about each other over the last couple of years, just sharing stuff. And it's been a great journey.
Yeah. Well, today we're talking all about this GSuite course that you did and have created. And you are my go-to person when people say, well, how do I use GSuite? So why don't we go back and just start with, why did you care about GSuite to begin with? Why take the time to learn this whole new platform? Yeah.
So when I first started my private practice, which it's been, one of the things that I realized is that I was really trying to get my practice more productive, and that there were so many things that are just repeated tasks, that we all experience, either from, how we do an intake with a new client and all of that. Excuse me. But one of the things that really the big reason I started getting interested in GSuite is I wanted to have my domain name at the end of my email. And so one of the ways, there are lots of different ways to do that, but when I started looking at GSuite, which back then it was called Google Apps for Work, it was just really a simple thing to do, where you sign up for their paid version, and then you're able to use your own domain name and still use the Gmail platform. So that was instead of it being like Gordon Brewer 529 at gmail.com, or then it would be Gordon and then practiceoftherapy.com. Oh, correct. And to me, that just adds a level of professionalism that you don't get with, you see people that have at yahoo.com or hotmail.com, and believe it or not, there's still some folks that have AOL.com out there.
You're just like, come on. You can't judge a book by its cover, but I think you can judge an email by its domain.
Yes, yes. So that was one of the main things that got me interested in G Suite. But then the other thing that really kind of sealed the deal for me was really recognizing that you could make it HIPAA compliant and make it HIPAA secure. And the big thing that you need for the standard thing that you need for HIPAA is for any service that you use, you need to have a BAA, the Business Associate Agreement. And Google does that for all of their core products. So like with Gmail, Google Calendar, with Google Docs, Google Sheets, Google Forms, Google Slides, all of those things come with a Google account. And it's anybody that's got like a Gmail account, you've got those things available to you, but unless you've got the paid version of it, you can't get the BAA. And
so if someone has just a regular Gmail account they're using with their practice, they don't have a BAA with Google and potentially could be outside of HIPAA compliance.
Correct.
So then they would, if they wanted to, they'd have to use something like Hushmail or other things if they didn't want to use the Google Suite.
Correct.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I kind of understood. Yeah, so is that automatic that you have a BAA when you sign up, or do you have to request that?
No, you have to request that, and it's just an online form that you fill out, and then they send you a PDF of the agreement. So how
do people find that form?
Yeah. So what I'm going to do, and we talked about this before we started, I'm putting together a cheat sheet that's got some of these steps on there that you can take. And there's just a link that you go to. You can actually Google, G Suite HIPAA compliance or HIPAA, and you can find that. But that's one step that you need to do. And also the G Suite, when you get that, they have some recommendations about how you set up on the back end that things to make it more compliant and more secure. And that's that's getting into a lot of technical stuff.
Yeah, and we'll have over at practiceofthepractice.com/resources. We'll have Gordon's checklist available there. That's kind of our hub where we keep all of these free cheat sheets and everything. We'll also put them in the show notes. So
okay, great.
So if people are out running or walking the dog or doing dishes, they don't have to write down all these links we talk about. So cool. So signing the business associates agreement, making sure you have that with your email. That's kind of just very super basic, like one of the of G Suite. What I'm really interested in how you've used it beyond. I mean, people of course use it for calendar. Maybe their assistant can see their calendar. Email. Those are the things that I think most people think of when they think of the G Suite. How are you using the other apps that are a part of it? Maybe take us through what they can do and how you're using that to create processes in your business.
Right. Well, one of the big things that I really kind of put together is that one of the things that I'm notorious for is trying to bootstrap too much, but at the same time, I'm always looking for ways to streamline processes. And the one thing that has always been one thing that I've dreaded doing, and that is just documentation, just with getting notes done for sessions and treatment plans and all of those sort of things. And so I was ending up spending a lot of time just typing all that stuff out. And so I thought, well, there's got to be another way to do this. And I thought, well, what if I could use like a Google form, which is again one of the apps in G Suite, and just create something where I could go through and do check off boxes and just simple phrases, and then have that spit out on the other side a narrative of my session note. And so you just go through and you could click off stuff, and then boom, it spits out a Google Doc, which is in a narrative format, and then I can just take that and cut and paste it into my EHR, my electronic health records things. Now, I know some electronic health records have some kind of functionality with that. But anyway, so I started looking at that, and lo and behold, I was able to put it together. And I use an add-on called Form Publisher that links Google Forms with Google Docs. In other words, it's just some code and stuff that is put in on the back end just by clicking a few buttons, and
Is
it
that created
creates
by
a
Google?
no, it's done by a third-party app. Excuse me. Done by a third-party app. It's called Form Publisher. But all of the Google apps, all of the G Suite apps, have different add-ons you can put with them to give them more functionality. In other words, do things that doesn't come with just kind of the core product. And so I created this thing called the Session Note Helper. And again, I'm going to have some information about that on the cheat sheet. But it's what I do is I just have the templates that I put together, and I do sell that, but it's because I put so much time into it. And so people can purchase that that template and then use it with Google Forms and Google Docs just by going through a few steps of just getting it set up. So it's a real big time saver. I can now write a narrative format session note in about 5 minutes or less. And so it's just really
just saves you tons of time every single session.
And that's the other thing about all of these the Google apps is that with all of them you can create templates, and templates are a huge time saver when it comes to being more productive. I mean, if you've got a letter or an email or anything that you send to people, if you're typing that, and it's something you do regularly, if you're typing that out every time, you really need to be making use of the different templates. And there's also a thing in Gmail that most people don't know about called canned responses. And so you can create certain canned responses to respond to things. And so that's, again, something that I put together in the course, just goes through all of those things that shows people how to set all that up.
Very cool. So what are other parts of the G Suite that most people maybe underutilize or don't utilize at all?
Yeah. So with Google Calendar, there is a way to set that up so that people can schedule themselves for appointments. And it's, again, it's stuff that you do on the back end where you can set, it was really designed for like colleges and universities where maybe a professor might have office hours or whatever, and somebody could go in and reserve a spot for their office hours. Well, you can do the same. Obviously, that's a perfect application for what we do in having people go online and schedule their appointments.
And you can set a certain section that people can just schedule for?
Yes.
It's not just anything that's open?
Right. And so
I can see myself leaving Saturday open accidentally and then people accidentally book. But you can just say Thursday from 1 to 5 or something like that.
Right. Those are your office hours. And then people can go in and reserve their office those times.
So how do you do that? Like, because that to me is something really interesting that I didn't realize you could do within there. Is that very hard to figure out?
No, it's not. I've again in the course I go through the steps and show on screen how to do that. But it's a matter of going into the settings in Google Calendar, and then there's a section there. Quite frankly, I can't remember to tell you how to do it step by step without looking at it. But you can go in through the settings of Google Calendar, and then there's a function in there for setting appointments. It's like setting up an event, but you set it up as an appointment.
Okay. So if someone just searched how to set up an event appointment in Google Calendar, they might
they can find it. Yeah, sure can.
That's great.
Yeah.
What are some of the other things that people use for automations?
Well, I think one of the things is to me, one of the biggest gems of the G Suite apps is Google Forms. And you can set up, for example, an online intake form that you embed on your website so that if somebody wants to make an appointment with you, you can have whatever information you need from them to set that up. And then when they submit it, you can set it up on the back end to where it sends you an email, or you can have it emailed to your virtual assistant or whatever, and they've got that information right at hand. It also automatically saves it to a Google Sheet. And so you've got that data in that Google Sheet that you can use later for like email addresses, that sort of thing. And
Well,
so
you just
those are,
mentioned virtual assistants. I'm thinking about Emily. She's our intake coordinator here. To set this up so it's a little more automated for her, so she's not sending these things people have to print out. Just to raise that professionalism and
right.
for people, especially that maybe aren't at the point that they're ready to invest in an electronic medical record, or they're going to, but they're private pay, so they don't really know if they need to. This seems like it could be a really good option for that.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. You can really you could really manage your whole practice with G Suite as long as you weren't taking insurance, because that's one feature that electronic health records have that you don't have with G Suite, and that's the ability to file claim. In my own practice, Kingsport Counseling Associates, I use both, and I use them just kind of in many ways, kind of interchangeably and to some degree, as far as creating. We've got for example, I've got a form that I created, a Google form. So if somebody needs like a court letter just to verify treatment, I go in and fill out the Google form, and it spits out the Google Doc with the letter, with my letterhead and everything already on it. Wow. And so it just saves a lot of time in that way.
I know when I was working at a community college as a counselor, I started a mentoring program where first year students that were struggling or that were statistically going to struggle would be paired with some kind of upper students. And we used Google Forms for them to do sort of like case notes. But they just would click on when they saw them, the length of time they saw them, some notes in there. And that was great because, the dean always, out of nowhere would want something for some report, like how many meetings were there? What percentage were this? And so then we could always run those numbers through Google Sheets. In a way that was way more user-friendly and made our department look really good too.
Right. Yeah.
So if people want to get really advanced, are there things that you would say are the kind of super advanced things to consider in Google Suite?
Yeah, I think the big thing is just learning how to link the different applications together using the add-ons. To me, that was a game changer for me. Learning how to use the different add-ons to do different things. Also, just one thing that a lot of people are specifically with Gmail, there's a lot of automation you can do with it as well. So, for example, any emails that I get from Joe Sanok automatically go into a Joe Sanok folder, and that's because I created a filter for that. And then there's some email.
Just totally skip your inbox and goes into the folder?
No, it doesn't skip my inbox. I could set it up that way, and I did. But what I realized is if it didn't go to my inbox, I would miss an email or two. But if you're disciplined enough, you could have it totally skip your inbox and just go directly into a folder.
Well, I know there's people that sign up for our 1-year practice plan, which is where you get a weekly email about starting a practice. It's $17. And some people will sign up for that before they're ready to launch a practice, and they'll just kind of put it in a folder. That would be a perfect thing to filter it. If you know you're not ready, but you don't want to lose that email, just have it go in the 1-year practice plan folder. That would be so much easier than trying to remember where everything is.
Right. And there's so much automation you can do with Gmail. For example, if you're wanting to, like me, I've got into some bad habits about not cleaning out my inbox. You can actually go in and do a search term, a search term of just put in the prefix in inbox : before and then the date. And what it will do is pull up all the emails before a certain date, and then you can go through and filter those out even more. And that way you can empty your inbox pretty quickly and sort through stuff pretty quickly.
Yeah, even just archive all. You don't lose it. It's just
that's exactly right.
When I wanted to kind of have bankruptcy in email, I ended up declaring email bankruptcy because I was so far behind a few years ago, and I just archived all. And then started with inbox 0, and that was a lot easier now. And we get 100 to 200 emails a day, so Emily goes through all of those, and then just stars the ones that are for me.
Right.
But I think having some of those more advanced things like canned responses and having some automations for things to be filed or color coded, that would help it be easier to kind of know what's in front of me too.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. What are some other things in Gmail? Because I feel like that's what, or in the calendar, because I feel like those are the two that people use the most. What other kind of tips and tricks do you see that?
Yeah. So with the calendar, I think most people know this, but you might be surprised. You can set up several different calendars in Google Calendar. So I could have a calendar that's just for stuff I do at home, a calendar for just stuff I do at work, or other organizations and stuff, and then you can overlay them. And you can also set up notifications in the calendar. The thing that's nice about Google Calendar is that you can sync it with all your devices, and that just makes it simple as far as you put something in on your phone or iPhone or Android phone, and you just type it in, and then boom, it's synced across everything. I think that's one of the big things there. The other thing too is being able to create templates. Google has kind of a different way of creating templates. Most of us, I know when I was, first started using, I'm dating myself. This is going to be foreign to people for me to say this, but I first started using computers way back in the dark ages. One of the kind of the standard was Microsoft, and in Microsoft, you can create a template by just saving it as a template. Well, in G Suite, you do it a little bit differently. There's two ways to create templates. You actually have a template folder within each application. And when you go to create a new document, you can actually click on the little arrow next to the new and next to creating the new document, and it'll ask you whether you want a blank document or from a template. Well, if you go into from a template, you can actually save other documents as a template to use later. And so if you create it from a template, that way you don't ruin the copy that you have. It creates a new template. So the other thing, the other feature with that is just creating a copy of a document. Mm-hmm. And so you can go into File and make copy and then start with a new document there. So a couple of different ways to create templates when you're working with different things.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think seeing a lot of this and having you walk through it is really important. So
right.
Tell us a little bit about your course, some of the units, and I know just me trying to visualize doing each of these things, it's hard to do that on a podcast.
Right.
So
right.
Yeah, I love that you've created this resource for therapists.
Right. So the course is it's 10 lessons, and in those lessons I start with an introduction, and then I go through basically each one of the applications that are most used, and I actually show you on screen how to do all these different steps. So for example, with the Google Calendar and setting it up so that people can select meeting times or appointment times, I walk you through that in this course. And so it's really close to probably close to 6 hours of instruction through video and just me talking about the different apps. And so, excuse me, it starts with an introduction. I probably ought to pull it up, but anyway, there's 10 units, and we go through each one of the applications from Google Docs to Google Sheets, Gmail, Google Calendar, and all of those. And then I show you how to set those up and how you can use those for private practice. And it's really, the course is geared towards therapists. And that's why, obviously, the name of the course is GSuite for Therapists.
Mm. Yeah. So if people want to sign up for that, we have a link. It's just practiceofthepractice.com/GSuite. And if you want to get the download that Gordon put together, you can see that over at practiceofthepractice.com/resources. So this is $98 and it's going to save you so much time. And Gordon, I know you've put a lot of time into creating this, and
right.
I've had some friends that have gone through it and really like kind of how approachable you are in your teachings. So if every counselor in the world were listening right now, every private practice owner, what would you want them to know?
Oh, wow. There's so much. But I think the main thing that I guess one of the things that just seems to be coming up as a theme is just really making sure that you're persistent and consistent with what you do. Being in private practice is really scary at first, but I think by just being persistent and being able to just commit to the long haul, you're going to be successful in your practice. And also, in addition to that, I would say don't try to go it alone. I know that was a mistake I made early on, and that was just not seeking out the help of mentors and peers and people that have been there before and having them help you along the way. It's going to save you so much time, and you're going to learn so much by doing it that way.
Yeah. And I think that's so important to be around other people that are at the same phase as you, or even a little bit ahead of you, to be in community, whether that's a mastermind group or next level practice or some other cohort that you create. Being around those people that are doing things that you want to do, that just helps you learn so much faster and then get the feedback you need.
Right.
Well, Gordon,
Absolutely.
Thanks so much for being back on the Practice of the Practice podcast.
Well, thanks for having me again. I always enjoy being with my friend Joe.
Sounds good. See ya.
See ya. Well, I hope that information was helpful for you in learning more about GSuite and just Joe's asking me questions and being able to answer those for you. Again, I'm so grateful to Joe Sanok for letting me be part of the practice and him being a part of the practice of therapy. And we've got a great friendship and he's a great friend of mine. And so again, I'm just very grateful to Joe for the work that we've been able to do together and the collaborations that we've been able to have. I will put in my show notes here for the Practice of Therapy podcast, access to that cheat sheet. I better say that slowly. The cheat sheet that we mentioned in his podcast, you can get access to that in the show notes. Also, as we mentioned at the end of his podcast, the importance of being able to find mentors and coaches that can help you in your journey. And as I'm a big proponent of, I think a mastermind group is one of the best ways to do that, because you not only learn from people that are experts, but you learn from peers and learn from their journeys as well, whether it's mistakes they might be making or just ahas that they have in learning how to do things differently. So go over to practiceoftherapy.com/mastermind and take a look at that. So thanks again, folks, for joining the podcast. And again, if you're listening to us for the first time, thanks for listening. And go over to wherever you might listen to the podcast, whether it be on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, or Stitcher, or Spotify, and subscribe to the podcast. That just helps us boost our ratings. And take the time to rate the podcast as well, wherever you might be listening to it. That just helps us get the word out and get more information to people. Thanks for joining me, folks, and I'll look forward to talking to you again next week. You have been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer. Please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com for more information, resources, and tools to help you in starting, building, and growing your private practice. If you haven't already, please sign up to receive the free private practice startup guide at practiceoftherapy.com. The information in this podcast is intended to be accurate and authoritative concerning the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, guests, or producers are rendering legal, accounting, or clinical advice. If you need a professional, you should find the right person for that.